The sun beat down on the small bench, and the scent of freshly cut grass mingled with the faint medicinal smell of the hospital. Clara sat, her apron tied neatly over a simple sundress, a paper bag clutched in her lap. Inside were 2 warm cherry tarts and a cup of lukewarm tea, her entire lunch. Her stomach rumbled in anticipation. This park bench, a small oasis in the bustling parking lot of medical centre, was her workplace. For the past several weeks, Clara had spent her days washing the cars of staff and visitors, collecting tips that she diligently tucked away. Every dollar, every coin, was a step toward buying the expensive medicine her mother needed. She hadn't even noticed the young man who dropped onto the bench beside her. His body language, an open invitation to conversation. He wore an oversized, faded band t-shirt and loose-fitting sweatpants. It was the white hospital slippers that gave him away. He was a patient. "Don't mind me," he said, his voice soft and apologetic. He looked pale and weary, his face a canvas of exhaustion. Clara simply shrugged and turned away, trying to pretend she was alone. "That's it. Goodbye, my peaceful lunch," she thought, the sigh escaping her lips. "Sorry, I can't make it to the next bench. There is no one to help me." The young man apologized again, his own sigh heavy with a weariness that went beyond his years. Something in his voice made the girl turn back. "Are you sick?" she asked, a wave of empathy washing over her. He shrugged. "My father brought me here and keeps giving me all these expensive pills, so I guess so." His words were a matter-of-fact declaration of a life he hadn't chosen. "Do you want a cherry tart?" The offer was out of her mouth before she could stop it. She held out one of the tarts, her heart a little lighter for the kindness. His eyes lit up like a child's on Christmas morning. "I do," he said, his voice filled with genuine wonder. He took the pastry carefully, as if it were a fragile treasure, and took a small bite. The juicy, sweet cherry filling burst onto his tongue, and his eyes fluttered, shut in pure bliss. A soft, contented sound like a purr escaped his lips. "Oh my goodness, this is delicious," he moaned, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "I love them too," Clara said quietly, but she was surprised by his reaction. It was as if he hadn't eaten in a month, and this simple tart was the most exquisite delicacy he had ever tasted. "Thank you," he said, finishing the last bite. "My name is Ben," he offered. "I'm Clara." She swallowed the last piece of her tart, then looked at the paper cup of tea. "Need a sip?" "You first," he said, smiling again. "I'll finish it if you don't mind. I am the sick one after all." They shared the tea, a silent communion of 2 strangers. Then Clara stood up. "I'm sorry, but I have to go." "Are you here often?" Ben asked, a note of disappointment in his voice. "I work here in the parking lot, so I'll be around all summer," Clara replied. "Maybe I'll see you again." She gave him a small wave and hurried back to her post, where an expensive-looking sedan had just pulled up. "Good morning," she said to the man who stepped out. He was impeccably groomed, from his perfectly coiffed hair to his manicured hands. A subtle, expensive cologne hinted at his wealth. "Can I wash your windows, lights and mirrors?" she asked, her voice hopeful. "No, thank you. I just had it detailed," he replied dismissively, not even bothering to look at her. In his hand, Clara noticed a small bag from the pharmacy. Her heart sank. The name on the bag was for the exact medication her mother, Evelyn, needed. Evelyn had been sick for years, but the official diagnosis of an incurable autoimmune disorder had only come recently. With the right medication and lifestyle changes, she could manage it and live a relatively normal life. Clara had just graduated high school and was preparing to go to college. But with Evelyn too ill to work, Clara had taken on the responsibility of providing for them, scrubbing away at cars, counting every penny, and saving what she could for her mother's treatment. She had never known her father, and Evelyn never spoke of him, so there was no one else to turn to. As the wealthy man walked away, Clara was surprised to see him approach Ben, who was still sitting on the bench. The man sat down beside him and spoke, but Ben simply stared into the distance, refusing to make eye contact. A moment later, Ben stood up, and the man followed. Ben stumbled, and the man reached out to steady him, but Ben pulled his arm away and walked toward the hospital entrance. The doors swung shut, and Clara couldn't see them anymore. Another car pulled up, and the driver asked for a window cleaning, handing her a generous bill. That evening at home, Clara counted her earnings and divided the money into labelled envelopes: groceries, rent and medication. The envelopes for rent and groceries were slowly growing thicker, but the one for medication remained painfully thin. "Mum, I met a boy today," she shared. "He was in the hospital, and I think he has the same thing you do." "What makes you say that?" Evelyn asked, surprised. "His father came to visit him and brought him medicine, the exact same kind you need. I saw the name on the bag," Clara explained. "He looked so rich, but he wouldn't let me wash his car. What a jerk." "Oh, sweetie, I'm sorry you have to do all this," Evelyn said, her voice filled with a familiar sadness. "I promise I'll get back on my feet and find a job soon." "Mum, no," Clara interrupted, her voice firm. "You're not looking for a job. We'll get you healthy first. I don't want you collapsing on the street again, with people just recording it on their phones instead of calling an ambulance." Evelyn shivered, chasing away the painful memory of a seizure in a grocery store aisle. She knew Clara was right. Her daughter's love was the only medicine that mattered right now. A wave of relief, fleeting and cold, washed over Evelyn when the final diagnosis came. The illness had a name, a shape, a form. But with that knowledge came the crushing reality of a treatment she could not afford. The clarity was a double-edged sword, and its sharpest point was the guilt that pierced her heart. Her daughter, just 17, had become the anchor of their small family, and Evelyn was drowning in the shame of it all. Ben stared out the hospital window, his gaze fixed on the quiet park, but all he could see was his mother's face, pale as porcelain and fading fast. "Son, please take care of your father," she had whispered, her voice a fragile wisp of air from the bed that had become her prison. "He seems so strong, so tough on the outside, but beneath it all, he is very kind and terribly vulnerable." "No, Mum, you're going to take care of us," Ben had shot back, his voice a shield against the rising tide of his own fear. "One more round of chemo, and you'll be fine. Don't you dare talk like that." He couldn't accept the truth that was written on her face every day. She was dying, and he was powerless to stop it. The bitterness in his heart was a venom, and its target was his father, the man whose neglect had sealed her fate. He was haunted by his father's words, a dismissive chorus that replayed in his mind. "Irene, why are you always complaining? It hurts. Take a pill, or go to the doctor, for goodness sake. Why do you women love running to doctors so much?" "Maybe you could come with me," his mother had asked once, a fragile plea. "Not a chance. I have better things to do. I'm not going to sit there and listen to a doctor talk about your ailments. Who's going to do my job? My business won't grow itself." And so she would wave away the pain, pushing through the suffocating guilt that she was a distraction from his important life. She endured until one morning, while making breakfast, her body finally gave up, collapsing silently by the stove. Stage 4. The doctor's verdict was a gut punch that left them all breathless. "The cancer is too advanced," he said gently. "Treatment is largely ineffective. We can try an experimental alternative, though." "Doctor, I'll pay any price," his father had declared, a man used to burying his way out of problems. "Let's try it, I don't care if it's experimental, just do something." The doctor's head shook slowly, a silent rebuke. "Mr. Russell, you should have brought your wife in sooner. The symptoms didn't just appear overnight." The man flinched, as if the words were a physical blow. The accusation was just, and it stung with the force of 1,000 regrets. "I'm a busy man," he mumbled, a hollow excuse he knew to be a lie. For a time, the experimental treatment seemed to work. Irene's colour returned and she began to move with a familiar energy. But it was a fragile hope, a wisp of a dream. One evening she collapsed again, and this time she never got back up. She died in Ben's arms, her last breath a soft whisper against his cheek. "You killed her! It's all your fault!" A 17-year-old Ben screamed, his fists flying at his father. "You didn't care about her! Your stupid business was more important than she was! What did she ever do to deserve that?" In the wake of her death, Ben began to wither. Grief became a physical ailment, a parasite that fed on his will to live. He would lie in bed for days, a statue of sorrow facing the wall, refusing to eat. When his friends came, their words of comfort fell on deaf ears. They would leave in silence, their footsteps echoing his own isolation. He blamed not only his father, but himself as well. He would stare at his mother's photograph, his mind a constant loop of apologies for his own blindness to her pain. Then the pain became real, a relentless assault on his body. First, his head felt like it was being pried apart, his eyes throbbing with a dull ache. Then, sharp, searing stomach cramps brought him to his knees, finally forcing a confession to his father. His father, now a man haunted by the ghost of his past, rushed Ben to the hospital. "Well, Mr. Russell," the head of gastroenterology began, a golden pen tapping a nervous rhythm on his desk. "I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but your son has a severe chronic inflammation of the digestive system. It's very serious." The doctor laid out the grim diagnosis and the road ahead. "He also has some significant mental health issues. He's depressed and he needs a therapist." But no amount of therapy or expensive medication could heal the wounds within his son. Ben continued to fade. His father brought him all his favourite foods, but after a single bite, Ben would double over in agony. New, even more expensive drugs were prescribed, but nothing worked. A few days later, after the first encounter, one day Clara sat on the park bench, a paper bag filled with 2 cherry tarts clutched in her hand. Her own heart ached with a familiar empathy, a silent knowing that some wounds run deeper than any medicine can heal. The thermos and 2 plastic cups was on the bench, while Clara kept her eyes on the winding path, her gaze a steady searchlight for the one person she had come for. Finally, his thin silhouette emerged from the dappled shade of the old oak trees. When he saw her, a small smile, bright as a sunbeam, touched his lips. "Hi," he called out, waving a hand that looked almost too delicate for his wrist. Clara's heart gave a little flutter as she waved back, a joyous, uninhibited gesture. "I had a feeling you'd be here," Ben said, his voice softer than the rustle of the leaves overhead as he settled onto the bench beside her. Clara held out the paper bag, its warmth a promise against the cool afternoon air. "I brought a tea too," she added, her own smile matching his. "Wow, I felt like something was pushing me outside," he admitted, his eyes wide with a sense of wonder. "I checked the time and thought, it must be Clara's lunch break." "Well, now we can have it together," she laughed, the sound as easy and natural as breathing. She watched him, captivated, as he took the first tart. He handled it as if it were a rare and precious artifact, his movements slow and deliberate. She couldn't help but ask, "You eat so strangely." He looked up, a bewildered expression on his face, and finished the first tart before even attempting to answer. "I don't understand it either," he confessed, taking a bite of the second. "Usually as soon as food touches my stomach, these terrible pains start. It feels like little gnomes are sawing at my insides with a tiny electric saw. It's the worst when my father comes. He just sits there and watches me, and I can't even swallow a bite." "I thought there was some tension there," Clara ventured, remembering the silent, charged encounter she had witnessed. "I saw how he was with you the other day." And then a dam broke within Ben. The words poured out of him, a torrent of long-held pain and anger. He spoke of his father's neglect, of his mother's fading health, and his own festering hatred for the man he believed had let her die. "He never cared about my dreams or what I was doing. It was like I was just an afterthought. He didn't pay attention to my mum either. His business was always on the throne, with us as mere subjects. He used to buy us expensive gifts, but he never truly saw us. And now he's here every day trying to make up for lost time." Ben's voice grew thick with emotion. "I don't need his fancy food. I can't even breathe around him, let alone eat. I feel like I'm suffocating, you know." "But you just ate 2 tarts, and you're not in any pain," Clara pointed out, her eyes shining with a sudden realization. "You should be doubled over right now." "I know, that's what I don't get," Ben exclaimed, his face a mask of astonishment. "I don't have the slightest hint of pain. Maybe you're a fairy, Clara. Being around you makes me forget I've been in the hospital for a month." "I wish," Clara said, her smile tinged with a familiar sorrow. "I'm just praying I don't get sick. Sometimes I just want to rest, to not have to hurry anywhere, to just lie there and dream. But I have to work, so I need to go." "Will you come back tomorrow?" he asked, his eyes filled with a desperate hope that pierced her heart. She nodded, a silent promise, and hurried off to the parking lot. That very same day, at the very same time, Edmund arrived to see his son. He held a full bag of expensive medicine as he walked toward the hospital entrance. Clara, no longer bothering to offer her services, was polishing the windows of another car, but she couldn't help but say, "He probably won't need those." Her voice was quiet but firm. Edmund stopped dead in his tracks, turning to look at the girl. Her gaze was a strange mix of accusation and pity. "Your son isn't sick in the way you think he is," she said, then turned and disappeared behind a row of cars. Edmund stood there, the girl's words echoing in his mind. He had to admit Ben did seem better lately. There was a faint flush of colour in his cheeks, and he was calmer, less prone to angry outbursts or long silences. But he still couldn't eat properly. Edmund decided to talk to the doctor. "Your son is incredibly stubborn," the department head stated, his voice a low, condescending rumble that felt more like a judgment than an observation. "He still refuses to engage with a therapist, but the medical treatment is yielding positive results. Slow perhaps, but progress nonetheless." Edmund felt a prickle of unease, a seed of doubt planted by Clara's words. "I've been given a subtle hint that he might not be suffering from what you're treating him for," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. The doctor's eyebrows shot up. A flicker of offence crossed his face. "Then perhaps those who offer such hints should take over his care. Why keep him in our facility, occupying a coveted space, even if it is the most exclusive suite?" The doctor's cold tone made it clear the conversation was over. He turned his attention to a stack of papers, his posture a solid wall between them. Edmund was not accustomed to being dismissed. He was a man who commanded respect, but his son's fragile life was at stake. Swallowing his pride, he mumbled an apology and a hasty goodbye, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and doubt. He found Ben back in his room, the curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. The usual hostility wasn't there, but neither was any warmth. The air was thin, silent, and heavy with unspoken things. "I was told that you've been spending time with new people from not our social circle," Edmund ventured, the words sounding hollow and foreign. Ben's head snapped up, a flash of fire in his eyes. "And what? I'm not a hermit. I can't just sit in here in silence all day." "You could talk to the therapist," Edmund pressed, clinging to the only solution he knew. "I was told you're refusing the sessions." "Have you even seen her?" Ben snarled, his lips curling in disgust. "She's a caricature from some cheap magazine. Her makeup is so thick it looks like war paint. It's only fit for a nightclub, not a hospital. And her laugh is so grating, even worse than her eyeshadow. It makes me want to hide under the covers and never come out." Ben's words were a torrent of pent-up anger. "You're surprised I won't talk to her? She has no idea what's wrong with me, and she doesn't care. She just pretends to, while my doctor, besides her husband, keeps prescribing new medications that I don't even need. It's a game to them, a way to bleed you dry." "Ben, stop this," Edmund said, a tremor of uncertainty in his voice. "Stop what? Telling the truth?" Ben's voice rose, a crescendo of pain. "You're just throwing money at the problem again, the way you always do. Instead of just talking to me, you're wasting a fortune and keeping me locked up in here. You never had time for Mum, and now you think you can hide from your own reality by putting me here. But you know what? It doesn't work that way." Ben laid back on his bed, turning his face to the wall. "Go away, I'm tired." Edmund was left standing in the silent room, a solitary figure in a world that had suddenly tilted on its axis. He walked out of the hospital, the doctor's words and his son's raw pain a relentless echo in his mind. The next day, Edmund returned at an unusual hour and spotted Ben and Clara on the bench. He saw Ben's face, alive with a quiet joy as he devoured a tart. A sharp, involuntary gasp escaped Edmund's lips. The two young people turned, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. In an instant, the joy vanished from Ben's face. He turned ashen, clutching his stomach and groaning as a wave of pain washed over him. "It hurts," he gasped, his body folding in on itself. Clara, her face a mask of horror, sprinted toward the hospital to get help. The orderlies rushed out with a stretcher and took Ben away, leaving Edmund standing alone in the park, a storm of fury gathering within him. He stormed back to the parking lot. Seeing Clara, his rage boiled over. He grabbed her arm, his grip like a vice, and spun her around. "Who are you?" he roared, his face contorted with rage. "You almost killed my son with your pies, you little brat. He was finally getting better and you did this. Do you have any idea how much this treatment costs? I'll make sure you can't even get a job cleaning toilets in prison. I'll see you rot in a gutter. I swear it." Clara wrenched her arm free, a look of pure disgust on her face. She wiped her hand on her jeans, as if his touch had left a stain. "You think you're so tough, waving your money, thinking I'm scared of you?" she challenged, her voice trembling but firm. "I've been feeding your son for a month, and you know what? The only time he gets sick is when you're around. I didn't believe it was possible, but now I know." She took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. I know exactly how much the treatment for the illness your doctors invented costs, because I'm working from dawn to dusk to earn money for the same medication for my mother, the one who actually has this diagnosis, not Ben. And your son, Clara paused, letting the weight of her words settle between them. He's not running from an illness, he's running from you and from your money, and from a kind of care that's really just a way to buy your way out of a difficult conversation. Her voice grew firmer, fueled by a righteous anger. So yes, if I have to clean toilets, I will, because I'll do anything for the people I love. You, on the other hand, just buy yourself peace of mind, and your son knows it. She fell silent, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts, but her gaze never wavered. Edmund stood before her, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscles in his cheeks twitched. His air of invincibility was crumbling, and for the first time in a long time he was at a loss for words. Then, without a word, Clara turned, walking back to her post with a quiet dignity that stunned him into silence. The next day Edmund returned to the hospital to check on Ben, noting with a pang of guilt that Clara was still there, washing cars, refusing to even look at him. Ben was feeling better, but he hadn't left his room. Edmund entered and sat on the chair beside his bed, where Ben was half reclined reading a book. Ben didn't look up. "Let's talk," Edmund said, his voice laced with a plea he hadn't known he was capable of. "What about?" Ben asked, finally meeting his gaze. "About what's happening between us." "Nothing new is happening," Ben said, looking back at his book. "I'm just another problem for you, and you're trying to solve it with money." "Ben, I was wrong," Edmund finally said, the words heavy with years of unspoken regret. "I admit I was scared. When your mother started to complain, I dismissed it as fatigue, not because I didn't believe her, but because I was afraid to. I thought that if you didn't acknowledge a problem, it didn't exist. But by the time we found out the truth, it was too late." Edmund's voice cracked. "I know how to run a business, how to make money, but I never learned how to support a person. I honestly thought money could solve anything. That there was no such thing as a bad doctor or an ineffective medicine, only a lack of funds." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "When she died, I knew I was wrong. Money isn't everything. I've cursed myself every day for not being there for her. When you got sick, I was terrified all over again. I was afraid of losing you too. And so I did the only thing I knew how to do. I put you in the care of doctors instead of being there for you. Now I see that my fear has only pushed you farther away. I was afraid to even consider that you might be physically healthy. Because if you were just happy and lonely, then it would be my fault. And I couldn't bring myself to admit that. Forgive me, son." Edmund said everything that had been festering in his soul. As the final words left his lips, he seemed to shrink, his shoulders slumping, all the life draining out of him. Ben had listened silently, his face to the wall. When his father was done, a sudden realization hit him. He turned to Edmund, his eyes wide with a new fire. "You can help, Dad," he said, his voice filled with urgency. "You can help someone who truly needs it. You have the chance to make a real difference." Edmund looked at his son in stunned surprise. Ben hadn't called him Dad in over 10 years. "Clara's mother is sick, and she needs the same expensive medication they've been pumping me full of. Thank God I stopped taking it the moment Clara started bringing me those tarts, and if it weren't for her, I don't know where I'd be. She's been my therapist, my dietitian, and most importantly, my friend." "And I thought she was more than a friend," Edmund said with a small smile. "You should have seen her. She stood up to me yesterday, and I haven't felt so humbled in years. She can definitely take care of herself and anyone she loves. You, by the way, are on that list." After that conversation, Ben's trust in his father slowly began to return. When Edmund paid for Evelyn's treatment, Ben finally forgave him. Edmund brought Ben home, and in the comfort of their own house, he quickly recovered. Edmund made a point to spend time with his son, and he could feel the emotional chasm that had separated them slowly closing. He eventually met Evelyn and was charmed by her kind spirit and grace, and Clara became a living symbol of strength and selfless love to him. 6 years later, there were 2 weddings. One was for a young couple who had just finished college. The other was for a slightly older couple. "Mum, congratulations," Clara said, hugging her mother, who was blushing and looking shyly at her new husband. Clara then turned to Edmund. "Edmund, I'm so happy for you, and thank you for taking care of my mum." "Thank you, Clara," Edmund said, his voice thick with emotion. "For my son, I'm at peace, knowing he's in good hands." And with that, their new life began.